I'm assuming some of them may join, may not join, but that's absolutely okay. All right. We have 40 minutes. As I said, I want to cover an important bit of experience from myself, 10 hard lessons of leading teams. The idea is to be able to give all of you a bit of flavor of what it feels like running teams at scale. And also, the reason for doing this lightning session is to essentially give you a preview on how a longer session, more engaged cohort really works at scale. So especially when I run the large cohort, which I'll explain to you in a moment, how that really works and essentially which are the topics that we cover in that forum. So we'll have a lot of material today. And this information will be shared with you, so you will have also a chance to engage with it. And if you have questions, obviously drop it on the chat. You can also reach out to me. And with that, let's get started. I think most of you know me already, but it's okay to just give another introduction. I'm Vivek. I'm from Berlin. I'm originally from India. I spent some of my part of my career in different companies. Right now, I'm at On. I lead the technology teams for e-commerce globally. I'm assuming you're also able to see my screen. If you are unable to, just let me know and I will help out with that. So the reason this is happening is because I'm conducting my 20th cohort in 3 weeks. I haven't done lightning session before, but I thought of experimenting this time and just to see how it works. But this is more like an immersive 6 hours on weekend program that I've been running for almost 1.5, 2 years right now. It's running in 20th season. So now I do it every quarter, just the amount of requests coming in. I think the only thing I can manage in doing it in quarter. So that's the reason of doing this session today, just to also give you a preview on what really goes into details in the longer session. I'll have more information at the end of this. Disclaimer before I share 10 hard lessons. This is very much uh, based upon my experience, personal experience, and the people I have coached and have mentored over the course of many, many years. So obviously, because it's contextual, please take it with a grain of salt, but also use this as another input if you're exploring a leadership journey, whether as an individual contributor or as a manager. You will encounter some aspects of what I share today as contrary to what you think or you believe in, and absolutely okay. It's different. It's great to have difference of opinions and different thoughts. So I think this is a good thing if you have a different way of thinking about this. All right. With that, let's start with number one, alignment and agreement. I'm assuming if you think about this question on the bottom right, when did you last have a full agreement about something in your teams? I hope this is not that common. So the reason I brought this up is I think from one of the lessons I learned is alignment trumps agreement. What I mean by that is organizations, especially organizations that are commercially oriented, are not democratic, and they're designed to preserve a momentum of a decision. Therefore, it's always critical for organizations to form alignments rather than form agreements. This is a hard lesson because my initial years as an engineering manager, as a person who leading teams, was try to get consensus about something. And I assume consensus means unity, which is not. So true progress really comes through alignment. So you might agree on some aspects, you might disagree, but essentially we all align on that. We form our opinions, but we basically disagree and commit, as the Amazonian principles talks about. So the true progress really comes from alignment and not having identical opinions about something. I will fly with this content. So if you have questions, thoughts, please feel free to drop on the chat. The next one is interesting, the loud doers bias. As you can imagine, the right side is a generative image. This is not a real image. There is an intrinsic bias in organizations, even with leaders, towards visibility, even if it's disruptive. What I mean by that is often you will find individuals who are contrary, complaining, if I can call it, but they are also the ones which create more visibility for them. And often there is an inherent bias towards these individuals. What I call them is loud doers. Loud doers is a preferred term I use. Loud doers demonstrate care, even they complain, but they can be hard to manage and they can take more mental space for a leader. So keep that in mind. You could be one of those loud doers in your careers. I was one of the loud doers in my career as an individual manager, individual contributor. I wanted to demonstrate care about something, but I also wanted to take action. It doesn't mean that that is wrong. I think people who complain and take action tend to get noticed and rewarded more. And it's not about the complaint that these individuals make, it's about the lack of action that sometimes drives negative perception of performance also. So keep that in mind when you think about or you notice loud people who are loud in general, but loud doers are often people who get more attention, but also get rewarded. Let me fly to the next one. Build to the best, not to the average. Um, I'm assuming all of you in your careers and your existing workplaces, you know that there are sometimes processes, rituals, which are designed not for the pros, not for the best, but essentially dumbed down in certain ways that it applies evenly to everyone across skill sets, across maturity. It's designed in such a way to be very inclusive, but however, it creates also wrong incentives and situation. So one of the things that I used to struggle with a lot in my early part of my career, and sometimes even today, is thinking about building something that applies to everyone, building something that anyone can maintain and operate it without context. So, write something that if someone who has no idea can jump onto it, which is great. Write a code that even someone who has no understanding of it can jump right into it, which is a good intention to have. But sometimes it becomes a bad idea, especially because if you start dumbing down to everyone, you're basically also losing the velocity and also losing the context, which perhaps some of the best people can have on that particular area. What does it mean? It essentially calls out that if you're designing or if leaders designing processes or systems around lowest common denominator, sometimes drags everyone down. So essentially, the alternate view to think about it is building for highest common potential and setting a standard. So if you have a process, ritual, set a system, how do you design for a highest common potential almost raises people up rather than dumbing things down. So build to the best, not for the average. Number four, delegating before you are ready. Something that I have had a lot of issues in my career. Of the biggest question as a leader, irrespective of whether what function, what area do you lead, is how do you decide when is a right time to delegate? And one of the things that you can think about is there's no right time to delegate. So how do you think about it? So one aspect that I struggled with a lot is thinking about, oh, I should not delegate this because my team cannot handle this. They're already overloaded. Or I'm just going to add on to the existing pile, which are good intention, sometimes right intention, but driven by fear. And I felt a lot of these ideas did not work for me. So in essence, leaders tend to hold on and essentially too long, waiting for the right time to delegate. And if you think that you should have delegated earlier, you're likely right. And this is something I also teach people a lot of time, including myself. I keep repeating to myself. So letting go almost creates a space for growth for other people in your teams, but also for yourself. So delegating before you're ready is something that I think is a hard lesson, which I picked up, obviously with little bit of time over my career, and I stick to round it even now. Number five, we're halfway through, and I think we can cover in 15 minutes, and we can get some time to get questions. So prepare for that. Hard things build real bonds. One of the questions I want to park with you, and if you're interested, put it on chat. What is the biggest contributor to team bonding according to you? I'm going to give you a minute to think about, and if you want to put it on the chat, that will be also great. So, what is the biggest contributor to team bonding according to you? I'll wait for a few seconds. If you have some thoughts, feel free to drop it on the chat. Mission. Thank you, Patrick. Let's keep going, but I will continue. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, definitely a mission really helps. But what really creates bonds for people? I think the lesson I learned is a real team building. Thank you, Mohammed. Attitude for teamwork. Absolutely. The real team building actually happens outside the offsites, outside the events. A lot of times, organizations, including myself, have spent time on bringing people together, which is really important. But the real team bonding happens when teams and individual groups of individuals are given extremely hard problem to solve, and that brings out sometimes the best and sometimes even the worst in them, especially a challenge that is not easy, and no single individual in that group can achieve it by themselves, so need to rely on each other. They need to kind of bring out the best in themselves but not also on the other people. What does it mean? I think relationships sometimes are, or most times, are forged in challenges. I think this also applies to personal relationships. So I have seen in my career sometimes shallow relations thrive when you are dealing, or individuals in a team are dealing with easy work, quote unquote, and people who are brought together on hard problems that they need to really rely on each other often leads to stronger trust. I'm assuming for a lot of you, this could be obvious, but I think a lot of times this is contrary to how you see it happening inside the organization. So keep that in mind. And as a leader, I've seen this also, or I've also learned this in a hard way, is if you have to really bring strong teams and build the bonds, bring actually a great mission, as Patrick mentioned, allow them the space to really solve hard problems together. And often you will see that leads to a greater amount of trust. Number six, as we said, we are crossing the halfway mile already. Perfect processes. So, perfect process is a myth. Why do I think like that? I've spent a lot of time, especially my initial years, thinking about devising the perfect process, the perfect ways of working, a perfect plan. And I assume the world around me will just fit according to the plan. You know how the plans work. And I think obviously that doesn't work in reality. Plans are hard in real life. You can put all the things on a spreadsheet and a presentation or in a document. I think when outcomes matter, which all the times, even great outcomes sometimes come from messy processes. So if you're chasing just a process perfection, it may actually kill momentum. I can give you an anecdotal example. At times, I think a few years ago, I was in a conversation with someone who was like, "Hey, we should not follow Scrum or we should not follow Kanban. I think we should follow a different style of process." And I think the question from my side to that individual was, is it all about the process or is something else? And I think often organizations treat the problems because of a process or an issue because of a process, which could be partly, but I think if you're focusing purely on the process perfection, you will you may not likely reach the right outcome. So often, if you look behind the scene on great outcomes, they might be you might see from outside as a messy process. I have a friend who used to work for a larger organization. I don't want to name that. It was very prestigious organization, a lot of reputation to be a very strong engineering culture. And when I spoke to them, it was a mess. I have no idea what I need to do, and it was always struggle to find who to talk to, which almost looks like a smell from an engineering organization perspective. But often that was how the teams operated, and they required that level of uncertainty and messiness in some way for in some individuals to thrive. Do I see this as a perfect example that every organization should be like that? Absolutely not. I think there's a role and place and time for good processes, but just applying and optimizing only for the processes is not going to lead to good outcomes. I think Milan had a good point. Classic example, implementation of agile processes. It's the process, how you implement, how you take it. If you just follow the foundational agile methodology and the principles, I think you can form and apply it any different way in your teams. It's chasing process perfection sometimes takes away people from really creating good outcomes. Number seven, 3 months is tomorrow. This is one of my favorites. And as a leader, our job is to able to see around the corner, anticipate change, and plan for it. But if I, as a leader, is often I am only driven by urgency, that eats into what is important for tomorrow. What I mean by that is, if your calendar, if your schedule, if your attention is purely on what's urgent, and you're not getting the time, also not creating the time, and you're not prioritizing the time for looking around the corners and anticipating change and preparing for it, the 3 months that you think a problem is going to be tomorrow. So, what I mean by that is, it's leaders. I have had those experiences that I've underestimated how fast time travels and moves over and over. And if you're only struggling or doing or putting up fire and dealing with work challenges, which are mostly urgent, then you're not necessarily doing a great job there. So that's one of the lessons that I picked up. Also, I'm assuming a lot of you resonate. Often time feels slow when things are not going well, but if things are moving fast, it's a high pace situation. 3 months is tomorrow, maybe 6 months is day after tomorrow. So keep that in mind. And I think for me, one of the lessons I take away from here is creating dedicated space and time for thinking about what's tomorrow, but also looking for opportunities where I can see around the corners by talking to individuals who may not, we may be sounding the alarm because they want to get attention to, but not necessarily that's the right place at that point of time to pay attention to. So think and keep that in mind, especially in your day-to-day role, is are you creating the time to think about seeing around the corners and talking to the right people? Number eight, when care becomes a cage. I had a long chat with a lot of folks I worked on in the last years around this. And what I mean by care and cage here, um, it means really protecting the teams. So as a leader, if I take all the worries away from my team, I could be coddling them. So what I mean by that is, if I shield them from all the noise of the world, which sometimes is really important, it does not mean that they need to be living in a different universe where everything is great. I had someone who I was speaking to a few months ago in a coaching session, and they were going through a very critical period in the organization, a crisis, people being fired, layoff situation happening. And he was struggling to really acknowledge that with his team. He was like, hey, his team believes they will be through this whole mess without any bruises. And they were almost in a protected state. And he was quite proud about it. And I felt a way of thinking about it, which is great for that team if that team feels that, this will not happen to them. But I also felt like the leader was under stressed. He knew this is going to come to the team. So he was doing a really good job protecting the team. But I also felt the person was burnt out protecting that particular team, and he could not talk to anyone. So I also felt a bit of this, individual in the middle between this upper management and the team. And he's trying to shield all that stress and taking it away from the team. And in that conversation, I had to tell him that everybody's aware, the team is aware people are being laid off. And I think it's good to acknowledge what's happening. It may not affect those individuals, but it's important to talk about it. You cannot solve anything. Maybe these individuals have nothing to do with that. But completely shielding it and just keeping it you and overprotecting the team may lead to bad outcomes, may lead to burnout of the leader who may not be in a function in a position to lead the team effectively. So what does it mean? The learning I had is like, yes, I love protecting my teams. Overprotection, especially from external challenges, I was assuming that is all helping the teams, but too much protection leads to coddling. And that leads to individuals not growing resilience. You should support your teams, but also be aware that you're not overprotecting and you're preparing them to face the things directly. Ultimately, you're working with adults. So overprotection leads to coddling, and potentially that could become a problem. And this is something I've learned over the last many years, is to keep that in mind when care becomes, or I would say over care becomes a cage. All right, we're closing on that. Silence can sink teams. What I mean by that, if you as a leader or your teams accepts everything that is being asked from them without pushing back. Generally, that is seen as a sign of weakness. It's how you push back that matters for the indicator whether the team is performing well or not. So just accepting whatever is being asked and then complaining and basically saying, I cannot do anything about it. I'm always asked to do random things. You're not pushing back and you're not pushing back constructively. That's the piece that you need to solve for. So if you're silent or as a leader or your teams, that can sink the entire team. So a sign that teams are disengaged is where everybody is silent in meetings. When one individual is chatting, mostly the leader, it's a likely an indicator that things are not right. Teams are disengaged. And individuals and teams not pushing back constructively also indicates that they lack either the engagement or the wisdom to think about what matters most in the problem space they're working on. So ignoring silence periods can cost the team a lot of pain. It can cause a lot of suffering, and it obviously leads to bad outcomes. The last one, you need to step on the toes. What I mean by that, focusing on outcomes, on good outcomes, means you leaning on sometimes being a micromanager, sometimes getting too much in details where people just say back off. It happens. It also means sometimes stepping over, sometimes taking more control or taking a control of something that you were not asked to. It applies to individuals, it also applies to leaders. This may sound contrary to what often people tell you, like respect the boundaries, respect the roles, respect swim lanes. But the obvious lesson that I took away that this is not a great advice all the time, especially when things are going south, when things are not moving in the outcome. Waiting is more expensive. So what I mean by that, putting it all together, leadership means stepping into unclear territory, taking on roles which haven't been even given to you, asking for roles which haven't been given to you. And if you just wait for things or others to step in, for the right person with the right role to step in, that may not always work. So keeping that in mind, know that as a leader, also leader does not mean that you need to be someone who is leading a team. You could be an individual leader leading yourself. You may require to step on toes. Sometimes you need to break rules, and that's okay. Obviously, when the rules are obviously not leading to people dying, and the roles are fluid. I think this is what I teach everyone. People sometimes take it too seriously. Oh, this is my role, and this is the other person's role. Roles are fluid. They can change. It's very situational, especially if in a fast moving environment. They are designed to be fluid and situational. They're designed for people to come in and break sometimes. So let's quickly go through all the 10 things I shared. So alignment trumps agreement. The loud doer's bias, remember that. Focusing on building to the best, not to the average. Preparing to delegate before you are ready. Hard things, buildings or builds real bonds. The sixth one, perfect processes is a myth. 3 months is tomorrow. I would also add 6 months is day after tomorrow. When care becomes a cage, so overprotecting, leading to coddling behaviors, silence sinking teams, and lastly, sometimes you need to step on toes. With that, I'm done with the 10 things I wanted to do in a fast paced manner. Um, you see the all of it in one place. This is obviously going to be shared. The video will be shared with you. If you are interested, if you want to go deep into the ocean around this and many more things that I cover in full range, I have a special offer for a lot of people. I basically run this boot camp every quarter right now. This will be my 20th cohort. And for everyone in this call and people who have joined and not joined, actually, I'm offering them a 25% off for only the last few seats which are available. This cohort is usually 10 people group at max. I had the next one on the April 12th and 13th. the average rating for these cohorts around 9.67. This is from Maven, and you also get obviously money back if you're not happy with it. So I also shared with you a glimpse on some of the videos that I put up on my YouTube channel around the clips from these cohorts so that people get an idea on how is it in the real world.